Dr. Socarides. Dr. Charles Socarides is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Socarides, based on your clinical experiences and years in the psychoanalytic investigation of homosexuality, how would you describe the homosexual?
Well, Mr. Simon, a homosexual, that is an exclusive homosexual, and there are various types of homosexual, the homosexual behavior, which is not true homosexuality, is a person who out of inner necessity must engage in homosexual relations, otherwise he experiences a great deal of anxiety. He's a product, really, of a process of very, very bad child rearing practices, which have caused certain difficulties in his own sense of identity, certain types of anxieties, and certain other inner conflicts, which make him, on many occasions, have an equilibrium which is quite unstable. As a matter of fact, the homosexual act itself we now conceive of analytically as an exquisitely designed symptom which helps keep him in equilibrium. And that's why homosexual counseling centers should not tamper with this very, very delicate balance. Those people who are not trained to do so.
Dr. Socarides, do you believe that the legalization of the homosexual union would aid the homosexual or would add to his instability?
That's quite a difficult question. There are certainly some homosexuals who want economic advantages and feel better with that. But however, I've seen very few homosexuals who ever really wanted marriage. It occurs sometimes in older males who have younger men lovers, and sometimes in older women with other young lesbian women. Now, this is an economic advantage to some degree, but I think that marriage, as everyone has pointed out today, being such a difficult state, I think that the bonds which would keep them together, the state bonds, the national bonds, might create considerable anxiety. Most homosexuals must seek and strive and look for numerous partners in order to try and find themselves or replicas of themselves.
And marriage, of course, would prevent the changing of partners.
That's right. It would make them subject not only to the laws, but to the laws as expressed by their partner, who force them to stay in relationships that they don't particularly want to stay in for very long.
Well, now, are these your reasons for refusing marriage to the homosexual?
No, absolutely not. Not at all. My reasons have to do something with the fact that I believe this is a social recklessness to raise homosexual marriage to the status of heterosexual marriage. An extreme form of social recklessness and also psychiatric disaster, which has already happened recently, trying to normalize homosexuality.
What effect would the marriage of homosexuals have on youth and children in our society?
Well, we must go back to the fact that sexuality, the heterosexual pattern, is a piece of learned behavior. You can learn homosexual patterning too. Not true homosexuality, perhaps, but homosexual behavior on a scale beyond your imagination and with consequences perhaps too tragic to mention here. There will be many, many more homosexual liaisons of a casual nature, many more homosexual encounters. Youth itself may be led into self-despising patterns of homosexuality. Frail heterosexual organizations of children may be tempted into homosexual behavior, which will have a deleterious effect on the sexual role in accordance with anatomy that a particular person has to play in life. You cannot escape that. Either the person is a male or a female, or he's an intersex. And we're not talking about intersexes. A man must be a man, and a woman must be a woman.
I'm going to have to interrupt right now to indicate that it's now time for Dr. Caminey to question this witness. Thank you, Mr. Simon.
Dr. Socarides, until 1942, your profession listed masturbation as a mental illness. Is that not true?
I think
yes or no, Dr. Socarides?
Compulsive masturbation is still a form of psychiatric disorder, although it's not listed in the DSM-2.
So you have your own.
Yes, because it is a form. It is a form. Yes.
Very well. So you have your own listing of illnesses. And the American Psychiatric Association, when it was founded in the vicinity of the middle 1850s, and its founder considered blackness to be a sign of genetic illness. Is this not correct?
I'm not familiar with that, but perhaps you're right.
I am. Now, of course, we don't believe any of that today. Judgments have changed. Isn't it possible that in 50 years it will be considered just as ludicrous when we hear all the comments that you have made about homosexuality? And is it not true that even now, the views which you express, as indicated by a poll which was initiated by you yourself of the American Psychiatric Association, represents the views of a minority of psychiatry?
Mr. Kameny, the poll, I'm afraid, is a fraud. Because
losers in votes always say that.
Well, I want to tell you something. This is now being subject to serious scrutiny. We have entered a complaint on this matter because all the publicity and all the vote-getting procedures for the other side were dictated by, paid for, and sent out by the National Gay Task Force.
That is factually
without the knowledge of the psychiatric profession. Now, we just wonder what's going to happen in a rerun if we can get one.
You won't. Is it not true that there are many homosexuals who do not seek a variety of partners?
I have not met very many, Mr. Kameny. Occasionally you do meet one or two who really, however, want to be heterosexual and want to approximate a kind of male-female patterning, and they cannot tolerate the idea of society being so much against homosexuality as it has been in the past. It is now changing, I know. But I've only occasionally, over hundreds and hundreds of patients that I've seen who are homosexual, seen those who can be satisfied, not because they don't want to be, but because they can't help it. They must find many, many objects who can fill them up with a kind of identity. And this means they must go from person to find this particular fulfillment.
Has it never occurred to you, Dr. Socarides, that the many gay couples whom I have seen, who in fact do not seek a variety of partners, who do not seek to pattern their lives on a male-female model in any sense, wouldn't go near you and your colleagues for treatment because they don't need it, and therefore your sampling is grossly non-representative?
Well, that matter has come up before, Frank. You know we've argued that, and it's been that we only see a skewed sampling of homosexuals because we only see those who come in who are complaining. But these complaining ones then tell us of their friends, and occasionally their friends come in and see us for consultation. We find exactly the same thing.
Have you
the same
no conception, Dr. Socarides, of what a travesty of science that is, the method you have just indicated?
The only method I use,
not the way
Mr.
to do
Kameny,
science, Dr.
the only
Socarides?
method I use, Mr. Kameny, is in-depth psychoanalytic investigation, requiring weeks and weeks, if not months and years of work, before we come to a decision as to what really makes up an obligatory homosexual. I'm not talking now about homosexual behavior, encounters engaged in for a variety of reasons, and now, because society tells us it's okay. The effect of this on society will be enormous. The effect of this on families, the effect of this on fathers who may suffer a slight potency disturbance will try men. Women, unhappy with their husbands, may try women in a kind of temporary regression, because this is the way they feel they can achieve temporary alleviation of their anxieties. Adolescents, and not to mention the individual homosexual himself, will be put into despair because medicine and psychiatry is now telling him there's nothing wrong with you, you're only neurotic in complaining.
Dr.
Be a
Kameny,
homosexual.
have time for just one brief question with a brief answer.
If two men, no, I'll change that. You stated that in those instances where there were stable marriages or relationships between homosexuals, they always involved two couples of disparate ages. You assigned
I didn't say they were stable.
You assigned a variety of economic bases. Are you aware that all of the cases, the growing number, that have come before the courts to legalize gay marriages have all been between two men, two women, of comparable ages and comparable circumstances, thereby belying your entire characterization of such relationships?
I'm sure there have been those too, but also the other kind.
Those are the only ones who have so far come forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kameny. Mr. Simon, another question?
Do you realize, Doctor, that there have been only 3 cases of this kind? Do you feel that is an adequate number of cases to create the example that Dr. Kameny wants to suggest?
No, I certainly do not.
Would you relate, please, to this audience what effect the creation of a mimic marriage through the homosexual marriage would have on the heterosexual family in our society?
Brief answer, please.
I think it will drive. Homosexuality cannot keep our society going. It cannot. It militates against the family and the cohesiveness of a society. Future generations will give no thanks to us if we declare homosexual marriage is equivalent to heterosexual marriage.
Time for one brief question from Dr. Kameny.
Dr. Socarides, aren't you, in effect, trying to use your psychiatry as a means of social control and are therefore, in fact, simply imposing your own moral judgments upon the whole matter, which is not a proper function for psychiatry or for you in your role as a psychiatrist?
Mr. Kameny, I am not a politician. I am simply a clinician. I know certain information, as do certain other analysts. There's 179 references in my book, contrary to what Dr. Green says, there's no evidence, which shows that homosexuality of the obligatory type, not of transient type, not of the homosexual encounters, but in cases where it's obligatory and exclusive, that in those cases there is pathology. We are interested in helping the individual homosexual. The despair you create, sir, in burying the homosexual, in taking him out of the realm of medicine and psychiatry, I would say is much worse. I am for civil rights. I was the first psychiatrist in America to ask for civil rights.
I'm going to have to interrupt you, and thank you very much for being our guest on The Advocates, but we must move along. Dr. Kameny.